introduction. Thank you for having me here. I'm just opening my PowerPoint here to have my notes. There they are. I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Cologne and the Cologne University of Applied Sciences. What I'm going to present now, this Marshmallows and Bullets presentation, is a part of this PhD thesis that is hopefully will soon be finished. And it's mostly concerned with the temporal aesthetics of games in two ways. In one way, I look at the formal structures in which video games, structure time, organize time, but I also look at theories of cognitive science and experimental psychology, for instance, or neuroscience that explain how we perceive time, how the brain constructs time, so to speak. And I then try to analyze games and these structures through the lens of these theories. Like I said, presentation is called Marshmallows and Bullets and the Aesthetics of Self-Control. But before I even start, I want to show you a commercial. The commercial is aired in German television in 2015. It's for the Kinder Surprise chocolate eggs. And for those of you who don't speak German, there will be a lady at the very beginning that will say something in that language, which is sort of like, I'm going to give, well, this chocolate egg is for you. I'm going to leave now, and if when I come back you haven't opened it, then you get a second one, right? So let's go to the video. Sorry, I have to use the clicker, I guess. There you go. Can we please play?
Dieses Überraschungsei ist für dich.
Dankeschön.
Und wenn du es nicht öffnest, bis ich wieder da bin, dann bekommst du sogar ein zweites.
Okay, well, this video, as I said, this is a commercial. It was produced by the German agency zum Goldenen Hirschen. In the end, this slogan, or the "nah neugierig," that basically means something like, well, curious. Maybe it's rough translation, which is sort of implying that the kids opened the eggs because they wanted to see what the trinket inside was. The Kinder eggs are well known for having a little toy inside of them. The commercial is called the Neugier test, or the curiosity test. And it's actually emulating a study that the psychologist Walter Mischel started in the late 60s, which is famously known as the marshmallow test. It's a very well-known experiment. Walter Mischel, actually a Vienna-born psychologist, but US-American citizen, started this with his team in the late 60s, and they wanted to study or to observe the strategies that preschoolers use to engage in self-control, right? How do they delay gratification, and if they are able to even do it, right? If you present them with a very enticing treat, and tell them, okay, I'm going to go now, and then if I come back, if you haven't eaten the marshmallow, you get a second one, see what the kids do. And you've seen in this video a little bit of the kids' reactions, how they struggle because they have this treat in front of them and they just want to have it. And I don't think they wanted actually to see what the trinket inside was, they just wanted to eat the chocolate, right? And in the case of the marshmallow test, well, sorry, I have to catch up with the notes here. The marshmallow test, they work with marshmallows instead of Kinder Surprise chocolate eggs, and in some cases they didn't even use marshmallows all the time. They used cookies or little pretzels. The kids would actually choose the treat they wanted because they wanted the kids to also choose something that they really want to eat, right? So it's basically any food probably rich in sugar or fats or something that will be appealing to kids would do the trick, and they don't need to have a surprise inside. But this was a part of a longer study, actually. The marshmallow test. I didn't go to the next, right? Like I said, oh yeah, there. It started in the late 1960s. And they studied 500 preschoolers in this, or over 500 actually in this first instance of 4 or 5 year olds. And And also differently to the commercial, some of them could actually wait. Some of them waited for as long as 20 minutes, and then they got the second marshmallow cookie or whatever. And some could not. And those could not, some waited for longer than others, right? There were different instances in this first stage, but there were differences also to what we say in the commercial. Like, for instance, the kids could ring a bell in order to call the experimenter back in case they were, I don't know, scared or something. And when, as I already said, they could also pick which treat they would have in front of them, right? As I said, the study is actually a longitudinal study. It's now what it's called now the Stanford Longitudinal Studies of Delay of Gratification, which, as far as I know, are still ongoing. And there were several other repetitions of this, or several other instances of these studies along the decades. And a second one, for instance, was in the 80s, where a smaller sample of these 500 kids, now teenagers, were studied, and they just wanted to find out how they were performing in schools and what social and academic skills they had and how well they were performing in social life, so to speak. For that, they looked at SAT scores, and they interviewed their parents and their teachers. And what they found out is that those children who waited longer in the first experiment tended, this was just a tendency, a moderate correlation, but there was significant nonetheless, that they tended to perform better in school and were judged more positively by their parents and teachers, both in their social skills and academic skills, right? So they already found some sort of correlation between the capacity to engage in self-control and delay gratification and later performance in school and social life. 20 years later, I quote Michel now, around the age of 25 to 30, those who had a delay longer in preschool self-reported that they were more able to pursue and reach long-term goals, use risky drug less, had reached higher educational levels, and had a significantly lower body mass index. So still, the correlation was still standing even more than 2 decades later, that the kids who were able to delay gratification longer were able to achieve more things in life, or successful according to some measures. They were more successful according to some measures in life, at least. A small caveat that this is something I'm going to come back to later, but while this also shows that some people are more innately capable of delaying gratification, the study also showed that this is a capacity that can be learned, right? This is not something that's predetermined, necessarily. Sorry, I think I didn't show you the quote. There it is. So I'm going to introduce a couple of other concepts now before I move to my case study and video games, actually, which is the focus of the presentation. But I want to mention first the concept of time perspective by Zimbardo and Boyd, also two psychologists. And time perspective, or TP, I quote, is the often non-conscious process whereby the continual flow of personal and social experiences are assigned to temporal categories, or time frames, that help to give order, coherence, and meaning to those events. Between the abstract psychological constructions of prior past, anticipated future, lies the concrete, empirically centered representation of the present. Right? So basically, this means that we organize our thoughts and ideas, we structure our behavior also according to these three time frames. Either we think about the past, we think about the present, or we think about the future. And some people tend to prioritize one of these three time frames more than others, right? Some people are more present-oriented and more spontaneous, and some people are maybe more future-oriented and can easily set goals in the future and think about the future. This depends, of course, on many factors, both environmental and genetic. It's, as always, in psychology, it's a messy combination that it's hard to separate. But thing is that some people are more likely to favor one of these timeframes over the others. I also want to introduce the concept of delay discounting, because this is also important, because to some degree we all sort of prioritize the present to some degree. For instance, studies have shown that people mostly would rather receive less money now than more money in the future. for instance, right? It's also commonsensical. If I told you I can give you 45 euros now or 50 euros a month from now, you might just take the 45, right? The future is modeled with uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen next or in a month. Not with 100% certainty, but we know where we are in the present right now, and we know which needs we have right now. So to some degree, we all prioritize the present, and this is the concept of delay discounting. The more delayed a reward is, the more its value is discounted in our psychology, right? So all these concepts of time frames, delay of gratification, delay discounting, they relate to everyday life decisions, right? For instance, when we go on a diet, right, and we don't order the cake at the restaurant, but choose not to have dessert, for instance, we're delaying gratification. If we choose to save money, if we go for a run instead of staying home watching Netflix, or writing a PhD dissertation instead of playing video games. Because as much as I like to use these cues, it's not always research. So I'm interested in how these apply to gameplay itself, right? Not just this relation to games as an immediate gratification, but also within gameplay. And I think this is easy to see basically in games that have some sort of resource management mechanics, especially if the resources are scarce in the game, right? And this is what I call the aesthetics of self-control that some games feature, right? My case study for this will be Resident Evil, especially the 2015 HD remake. That's the screenshots that I'm going to show you are from my own gameplay from that video game. And this is a game in the genre of survival horror. What you're seeing here, beside the title there, it's just actually a screenshot from the game. Many of you might know it. This is the game that gave the genre survival horror its name, because it greets the player with this screen, Willkommen Überlebenshorror, or Welcome to Survival Horror, right? So also games like Alone in the Dark, for instance, got retrospectively called survival horror after Resident Evil. And this is just a salient example. I think this applies to other video games as well, right? So don't take it as I'm saying this is the only case. So I think there are many ways in which this game tries to set the player into a present-oriented temporal perspective, right? To make the player impulsive, to make the player unreflective. One is through the aesthetics layer, the aesthetical layer, right? Sounds and images, right? I'm going to eschew the details of the story because they're not exactly relevant, but the player usually takes control of either Chris Redfield here on the screen or Jill Valentine, and they're mostly alone in a mansion. There are some other team members of their special agents group, but mostly alone, exploring this dark mansion. It's very unsettling atmosphere. It's night. They cannot go outside because the house is surrounded by a pack of ravenous dog zombies, and which already sets the tone for sort of a horror game, a horror setting, right? Which is already unsettling. It's already a bit unnerving, and this place is mostly silent, and it's dark, and it's a huge, desolate mansion, and which is also, by the way, plagued with zombies. The game also tries to put the player in this, I think, present-oriented time frame or time perspective mode, because and to be impulsive through the mechanics, so through many aspects of the mechanics. And here, for instance, I don't know if you can see it very well, but through the camera, for instance, the game disorients the player often. We can see here on the left, the character is walking toward the camera, and on the right, well, once the player reaches sort of the edge of the frame, the camera flips 180 degrees, and now you're seeing your player from the back, right? Your player character from the back. Not all cameras react the same way. Sometimes the camera might pop on top, or I don't know, there are different angles all the time, but the thing is you never know exactly which angle you're going to get unless you memorize them. So it can be disorienting, especially in times where the player is pressed, fighting zombies or something. Another way the game challenges the player and makes this anxiety and this unsettling, these feelings of danger more intense is by the movement and shooting mechanics. Because especially the first Resident Evil, the first version, the original version of the Resident Evil, the second remake for the GameCube, they had this so-called tank controls in which to move you have to press up, and then the player goes forward. And if you want to turn, you have to press either left or right, and then the player will turn. But it's a very kind of slow and unintuitive setting. This last remaster of the game includes that setting, but also has a more intuitive control setting in which the direction I press in the controller is simply the direction in which the player will walk, and it will turn automatically. No need to press left or right to turn the character, right? And also, the game also only gives like a binary strategy to engage with, to the player, to engage the enemies, and it's either fight or flight, right? When you're aiming the gun in this stance, you can see hopefully you can see in the picture, you cannot walk. You're either aiming the gun and shooting, or walking or running away. So once you decide to engage a zombie, and zombies usually walk towards you because they want to eat you, you're committed to this position, and you can start shooting. But also it's difficult sometimes to aim, even though there's auto-aim in this game, but if you have more than one enemy, and with these camera angles, it's sometimes tricky to tell, am I aiming right? If you want to land a headshot, it's also kind of hard. Compare it, for instance, to the camera, the more typically for a third-person shooter camera that Resident Evil 4 introduced for the first time in the series, right, where you have a head-over-the-shoulder camera, and you have even this laser sight or pointer that show you exactly where you're aiming at, right? It's way easier. This other way of aiming is much more disorienting. And this leads me also to resource management in the game. As I said, I think these aesthetics of self-control are present in games where there's resource management, right? So you have this game that is always pushing you to be to be impulsive, to be emotional, to be scared. But then that gives you very little resources to survive. It gives you very little bullets. It gives you just a bunch of guns, but you cannot carry them all at once. As you can see, this is Chris Redfield's inventory. You only have 6 slots, right? With Jill Valentine, you have 8. But so here, you can carry a gun, a canister with kerosene, because you have to burn the zombies, so if not, they will come back as even tougher zombies. And so you soak them with kerosene and light them on fire with a lighter over there. And other items, like killing items, keys to open doors, and if you want to have a free slot to pick up other items that you might find on the way, then you don't have a lot of space for a lot of things, right? The gun in this case you can be loaded with 15 bullets, and I'm not carrying here in any more bullets. So, and with 15 bullets, you basically can kill 2 zombies, maybe 3 if you're extremely lucky. So, and the rest of the items that the player collects during the game are stored in item boxes. And you have to go back and forth to these item boxes to change the strategy, right? And to change your equipment. Another interesting way the game uses the resources is through the saving mechanic. As you might know, in games you can save game states and then load them whenever you fail. In Resident Evil, saving is also a scarce resource. To save, you need to find these typewriters. They're usually in the same rooms where the item boxes are. And to use the typewriters, you need an ink ribbon. And these ink ribbons are scattered across the mansion, and they are also rare items, right? So this will push the player to make as much progress as he or she can without saving, which of course raises the stakes. The longer you play, the more it raises the stakes, and you are always, the tension increases because every time you're in danger, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to lose all this progress because I wanted to save an ink ribbon, So this also helps increase the tension and put the player, also in a very tense emotional state. Finally, this one's particularly dark, but I wanted just to mention that enemies are also very tough. Compared to your player character, which can usually die with, a couple of bites of a zombie, maybe 4 or 5 bites, I don't know. You need to at least shoot like 7 bullets to a zombie to kill them, more or less depending on where you shoot. But they're very resilient, very tough, and they fall down, maybe sometimes they even stand up again. It's hard to read. So you have to learn how to read those things in the game. So that's also, every encounter then, it feels like your life is really at risk. So this is not like a run and gun game like maybe Doom, for instance. it's a game in which you have to approach every encounter strategically, think about it, and try to keep a cool head while the game is pushing you to be impulsive. Which brings me back to Michel and his marshmallow test and the final part of the presentation. Michel talks about the brain as having two systems. This is also something that Daniel Kahneman does. Daniel Kahneman, psychologist, calls it system 1 and system 2. Michel calls them the hot system, which is the Kahneman system 1, and the cool system, which is Kahneman's system 2. The hot system in our brain is emotional, is fast, is intuitive, and it's cheap, metabolically speaking, it's cheap. The cool system is rational, is slow, is reflective, but it's also metabolically costly, right? So in this way, we're kind of wired to be impulsive and to be lazy and not to think about things because it's cheaper not to be. It's cheaper to just act and react according to our intuitions, and these intuitions are created by this hot system. But in order to succeed in the game, which is always engaging us in a way that we will tend to react by using the intuitions that the hot system gives us, right? And these emotions, the game requires you to use the cool system, actually, to win, to be rational, to think about how you're going to use and allocate your resources and things like that. So, going back then to what I said before the case study, Michel, one of the findings of the marshmallow test was also that the ability to delay immediate gratification for the sake of future consequences is an acquirable cognitive skill, right? It's not something that you're either born with or not. It's not like that. Some people, though, might have it more easily than others, but still you can learn it and acquire it, which is very important. Also, if you think about policies and education and stuff, this is an important skill that we should teach people, right, kids. And there are some ways in which Michel observed that kids could behave in order to wait longer, and for instance, in some instances of the study, they covered the reward, right? They showed the kid that there was a reward, and then they covered it with something so that they couldn't see it while they were waiting, and they consistently waited longer, right? So if the reward is out of sight, it's out of mind, like you say, so you can already wait longer. The allure of this reward is not so strong. Another one, which was surprising to me, is that they told some kids, imagine that this marshmallow is not a marshmallow, but it's a picture of a marshmallow. Put a frame around it or something, and then see what happens. And they consistently waited longer, much longer than kids that even longer than kids that had an actual picture of the marshmallow. And they told those kids, imagine this is a real marshmallow. Those kids waited for a shorter time than the ones that were imagining a frame around the real marshmallow. It's weird. Some other kids used other strategies. They sang songs. They played with the bell. Like, for instance, one started moving the bell in a way so that it didn't ring and played with that. And they distracted themselves, right? So there are many strategies. There are many ways in which you can engage in self-control and delay a gratification. And these are just a few of them. And the other thing is the more you engage in self-control, the better you get at it. The better you get at applying these strategies, right? So just a couple of final thoughts. Well, Resident Evil and these games that have these aesthetics of self-control, right? Well, in the case of Resident Evil, I call it like a bullet test in analogy to the marshmallow test, right? The bullet would be sort of like the analog to the little marshmallow on the table. But I think this aesthetics of self-control also applies to vast numbers of games, right? If you think of any game that has some sort of resource management and that resources are to some degree scarce, then you have to engage in self-control in order not to just squander these resources. And we can also think of strategy games besides survival or survival horror games, for instance, right? And finally, this is my own speculation, but I think maybe we can use games also to learn to exert self-control and to learn the strategies to get to know ourselves better, also to see how impulsive we actually are, and then to engage in these strategies of self-control and actually learn them and acquire them through gameplay. So that was it. Thank you very much for your attention. Here are some references.